The courtroom was unusually tense that morning. Cameras from nearly every major network lined the back wall, their red recording lights blinking like watchful eyes. Judge Andrew Napolitano sat at the bench, his gavel resting beside a thick stack of legal documents. Across the room, Representative Jasmine Crockett adjusted her blazer, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. The case at hand was political theater as much as it was law, an argument over alleged procedural violations during a heated congressional committee hearing. Napolitano, known for his stern rulings and no-nonsense demeanor, wasted no time in making his position clear. Representative Crockett, he began, his voice booming through the speakers, your actions in the matter before this court are a direct violation of established protocol. I am imposing a fine of $2,500, effective immediately. A murmur rippled through the spectators. Some reporters scribbled furiously, others looked up, anticipating a reaction. Crockett's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She simply leaned forward, resting her hands on the defense table. Your Honor, she said evenly, I hope you're prepared for what comes next. Napolitano raised an eyebrow, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she reached into her briefcase, pulling out a thick folder labeled in bold letters. The air in the room seemed to thicken. This wasn't over. Not even close. Jasmine Crockett slid the folder across the polished defense table toward the court clerk. Please make sure His Honor receives this, she said, her tone professional yet edged with something the audience couldn't quite name, confidence. Napolitano adjusted his glasses and began to leaf through the first few pages. Almost immediately, his expression shifted from casual authority to something far less comfortable. The folder wasn't just filled with legal arguments, it contained certified transcripts, time-stamped video stills, and signed affidavits from credible witnesses. The evidence told a very different story than the one Napolitano had been given. Crockett rose to her feet, addressing the court. This fine is not just unfounded, it's politically motivated. What's more, I can prove, on record, that the procedural violation you've accused me of never happened. Reporters exchanged glances, their pens momentarily frozen. The judge's grip on the file tightened. Napolitano tried to mask his unease. Representative Crockett, this is highly irregular, with respect, Your Honor, she cut in, what's irregular is punishing an elected official for something she didn't do. And what's even more irregular, she turned toward the gallery, locking eyes with the cameras, is what happens when the public learns the truth. Gasps erupted from the room. Napolitano's gavel struck the desk once, but the sound no longer commanded the same authority. Something told everyone watching, he had just stepped into quicksand. Judge Napolitano leaned back in his chair, trying to project control, but Crockett's words had already shifted the energy in the courtroom. The reporters, sensing a storm, were now standing at the edges of their seats, cameras zooming in on every flicker of expression. Crockett continued, her voice steady but charged with precision. Your Honor, the timeline in that evidence folder matches the official congressional record. The so-called outburst you claim disrupted proceedings occurred after the committee had adjourned. Which means, she paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air, there was no violation to fine me for in the first place. Napolitano cleared his throat. The court, but Crockett wasn't finished. And furthermore, she said, holding up a USB drive for everyone to see, this contains unedited footage from 3 separate angles. Obtained legally. Verified by independent analysts. It will be public by the end of today, whether or not you review it here. The judge's eyes narrowed, but his hands remained still. He knew the kind of damage a viral video could do, especially when paired with a narrative that painted him as overreaching. In the gallery, whispers turned into low chatter. One voice rose above the rest, she's got him cornered. Crockett returned to her seat, sliding the USB into her open laptop. Your move, Your Honor. For the first time in the hearing, it wasn't the judge controlling the pace, it was her. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Napolitano's gavel hovered above the desk but didn't strike. He glanced toward the prosecution table, where 2 advisors avoided making eye contact. They'd clearly underestimated how prepared Crockett would be. Crockett, however, sat with perfect composure, her laptop screen angled just enough for the cameras to catch a freeze frame from the video, her standing calmly in the committee room, timestamp flashing in the corner, proving the session had already ended. Representative Crockett, Napolitano said slowly, "You understand that challenging the court in this manner could what?" she interjected, her tone sharp but controlled. "Expose the truth faster. If that's the case, I'm guilty as charged." The room erupted in murmurs again. A few reporters couldn't help but smirk. This was political drama gold. Napolitano tried to regroup. "I will need time to review this." "Of course you will," Crockett said, sliding a printed statement toward the bailiff. "In the meantime, I've also filed a formal ethics complaint with the State Judiciary Board regarding this fine. They'll have the same evidence you do. I made sure to submit it at the exact moment this hearing started." The judge's fingers twitched against the bench. He understood what that meant. This was no longer just about a courtroom fine. His own conduct was now under official scrutiny. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. Napolitano's voice dropped into a lower register, the kind judges use when they're trying to regain control. "Representative Crockett, I will remind you, this is still my courtroom." Crockett met his gaze without a flicker of hesitation. "And I'll remind you, Your Honor, your courtroom still operates under the law. And the law is on my side today." The cameras caught the exact moment his jaw tightened. The entire exchange had been broadcast live to a national audience, and social media was already buzzing. Staffers in the gallery were discreetly checking their phones, eyes widening as headlines and clips began flooding in. Crockett leaned forward, her voice steady but with an unmistakable edge. "If this fine was meant to intimidate me, it failed. If it was meant to silence me, it backfired. And if it was meant to discredit me," she paused, letting the silence stretch. "You might want to start drafting a statement, because the public is about to hear every detail." Napolitano shifted in his seat, his usually commanding posture subtly diminished. One of the reporters in the front row whispered to another, "He's losing this." On live TV. The gavel came down once, not in authority, but in retreat. "Court will recess for 1 hour, Napolitano said, his voice tight. Crockett didn't even look at him as she began organizing her papers. She already knew, this hour would not save him. The moment Napolitano stepped through the side door, the courtroom erupted into a storm of voices. Reporters hurried toward the exits, already on calls with their editors, while camera crews kept rolling to capture every reaction. Crockett remained seated, methodically packing her files into her briefcase. She wasn't rushing. If anything, she moved slower, as if to show she was in complete control of the pace now. Her aide leaned over and whispered, "The clip's already trending. Hashtags with your name are exploding." Crockett allowed herself the faintest smile. "Good. The more eyes on this, the harder it will be to twist the narrative." Across the room, the court clerk approached cautiously. "Representative Crockett, off the record, that was something else." She closed her briefcase with a soft click. "It wasn't a performance. It was the truth. And truth has a way of making people nervous, especially those who think they're untouchable." As she rose, photographers swarmed her path to the double doors. Flashes lit the room as questions were shouted over one another. "Do you think the fine will be dropped? Will you pursue action against Judge Napolitano? Is this going to Congress?" Crockett paused at the threshold, turned to face the cameras, and delivered her answer in one calm, deliberate sentence. "I don't need to pursue anything, the facts will do the work for me." Then she stepped out into the corridor, leaving the courtroom buzzing in her wake. The hallway outside the courtroom was a frenzy, boom mics stretched over the crowd, reporters jostled for position, and flashbulbs popped in rapid bursts. Crockett walked steadily through the chaos, her aide at her side, both of them moving as though they'd been here 100 times before. One reporter managed to get close enough to hold out a phone. "Representative Crockett, sources say Judge Napolitano looked visibly shaken. Do you have a comment?" She didn't break stride. I have no interest in his feelings. My concern is with the integrity of the process. The statement was clipped, professional, but her tone made it clear she knew she was winning the public battle. Halfway down the hall, her aide's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, eyes widening. "You need to see this," she said, turning the display toward Crockett. On it was a live news broadcast. A legal analyst was already dissecting the footage she'd shown in court, declaring on national television that the fine appeared unjustified and possibly retaliatory. Social media comments streamed across the screen, overwhelmingly in her favor. Crockett allowed herself a brief nod. That's the court of public opinion, and it moves faster than any gavel. Just then, another aide hurried up from the opposite direction, slightly out of breath. "Ma'am, Judiciary Board representatives are requesting an immediate meeting. They've seen the evidence." Crockett stopped, her eyes narrowing with focus. "Then let's give them the whole picture." The political tables weren't just turning, they were flipping entirely. By the time Crockett arrived at the Judiciary Board's conference room, the atmosphere was electric. Several members sat at a long mahogany table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Large screens were already set up, displaying paused frames from the committee footage she had brought to court. The chair of the board, a composed woman in a slate-gray suit, gestured toward an open seat. "Representative Crockett, thank you for coming on such short notice. We've reviewed part of the material, but we'd like to hear your account directly." Crockett set her briefcase on the table and, without a word, began handing out neatly organized evidence packets. "You'll find time-stamped transcripts on page 1, authenticated by the committee clerk. Pages 3 through 5 are affidavits from witnesses, including members of the opposition party. And the USB in the back contains 3 synchronized camera angles, unedited." One of the board members leaned back, flipping through the transcripts. "These records, they contradict the official report that Judge Napolitano cited." "They don't just contradict it," Crockett said firmly. "They prove it's false. And that the fine he imposed on me was an overreach, possibly to send a political message." The chairwoman exchanged glances with 2 other members, clearly aware of the implications. "Representative Crockett, if what you're alleging is accurate, this could warrant an immediate ethics review of the judge." Crockett folded her hands on the table. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because no official, no matter their title, should think they can twist the law without consequence." The room fell silent for a beat. Then the chairwoman spoke, "We'll convene privately and make our decision within 24 hours. Crockett nodded, rising from her seat. She didn't need 24 hours to know which way this was heading. As Crockett exited the Judiciary Board's building, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps. A fresh wave of reporters had gathered, drawn by leaks from sources close to the board, that the evidence against Napolitano was damning. She descended the steps slowly, the crowd parting just enough for microphones to stretch toward her. "Representative Crockett, is Judge Napolitano under investigation?" one shouted. "Do you expect him to resign?" another asked. Crockett stopped midway down the stairs, her briefcase in one hand, and addressed them directly. "What I expect is accountability. The rest is up to the process, and the people watching." The quote was short, but it hit hard. Within minutes, news tickers across multiple networks were running it in bold, and the clip spread online like wildfire. Meanwhile, inside his chambers, Judge Napolitano sat at his desk, staring at the same footage the board had just reviewed. The more he watched, the more his stomach tightened. Every frame undermined his justification for the fine, and every frame was now in the hands of people with the power to act. His phone buzzed, another call from his public relations advisor. He didn't answer. There were no magic talking points for this. Back outside, Crockett's car pulled up to the curb. As she slid into the back seat, her aide turned to her with a grin. "Ma'am, the evening news cycle is yours. Every major outlet is leading with your story." Crockett looked out the window, her reflection calm but resolute. Good. Let's make sure they also lead with the truth. That evening, Crockett's appearance on a primetime political talk show sealed the day's momentum. The studio backdrop displayed a looping clip of the courtroom exchange, the moment she slid the evidence folder to the clerk, while the host leaned forward with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "Representative Crockett," the host began, "you've turned what was supposed to be a penalty into what some are calling a masterclass in political defense. Was this all part of a strategy?" Crockett smiled faintly. "No. It was part of doing my homework. When you walk into a courtroom, or a committee room, you come prepared. The truth is a powerful ally if you have the receipts to back it up." The host nodded, playing another clip, this time of the Judiciary Board chair stating they would "move swiftly" in their review. "Do you think Judge Napolitano will still be on the bench a month from now?" "I'm not in the business of predictions," Crockett said evenly, "but I am in the business of transparency. And once people see what really happened, they'll make their own judgment." Within minutes of the broadcast, social media hashtags tied to her name surged even higher. Memes, side-by-side comparison videos, and commentary from legal experts flooded the feeds. One particularly viral post read, "He fined her $2,500. She fined him his reputation." Meanwhile, inside his home, Napolitano watched the interview in silence. The glow from the TV reflected in his glasses, his face expressionless, but his tightened grip on the remote told the real story. The tide wasn't just turning, it had already turned. By the next morning, the headlines were merciless. "Judge under fire after Crockett evidence bombshell" splashed across major news sites, while editorial columns openly questioned whether Napolitano could continue presiding over politically sensitive cases. At the courthouse, whispers followed him through every hallway. Staff avoided meeting his eyes, and even longtime allies kept their conversations brief. The Judiciary Board had announced they were expediting their review, a rare move that signaled urgency and seriousness. Meanwhile, Crockett arrived at her Capitol Hill office to find stacks of supportive letters, messages from constituents, and even calls from colleagues who had once been reluctant to align with her publicly. "You handled that better than anyone I've seen in years," one senior lawmaker told her over the phone. "Napolitano didn't just underestimate you, he underestimated the public's appetite for the truth." Her aide entered, holding a printed statement from the Judiciary Board's press secretary. "They're going to release preliminary findings today. And it's not looking good for him." Crockett set down her coffee, reading the statement twice. "When it's official, we'll respond," calmly. "We don't need to gloat. The facts speak louder than any victory lap." Across town, Napolitano sat at his desk, the morning sunlight doing nothing to ease the heaviness in the room. He knew the board's findings would hit the press before the day was over. He also knew he had no defense that wouldn't unravel under scrutiny. The fine he had issued to silence her was now the very rope tightening around his career. By late afternoon, the Judiciary Board's statement was public. In measured but unmistakable language, it concluded that Judge Napolitano's fine against Representative Crockett was issued without sufficient legal basis and appeared to stem from subjective and extrajudicial considerations. The board announced that a formal investigation into his conduct would proceed immediately. News alerts lit up across phones and TV screens. Legal commentators didn't mince words, many called the findings a devastating blow to his credibility. Some even speculated that resignation was inevitable. Crockett, seated in her office, watched the live coverage without a triumphant grin or celebratory toast. Instead, she quietly signed a letter formally requesting the fine be rescinded and the record corrected. When a reporter called to ask for her reaction, she offered a single line, "I trust the system to handle the rest." Meanwhile, in his chambers, Napolitano sat alone, the statement printed and folded on his desk. The gavel beside it, a symbol of authority he had always assumed was unshakable, suddenly felt like a heavy, hollow ornament. Outside his door, the courthouse buzzed with talk of possible disciplinary hearings. The irony was undeniable. A fine meant to diminish Crockett had instead elevated her, not just in public perception but in political stature. She had walked into his courtroom accused and walked out vindicated, while his own legacy hung by a thread. For the watching public, the lesson was clear: underestimate her, and you'll regret it instantly.